Language is the most influential thing in your life, and story is the most important. Welcome to Equal Matters. That intro from my man Cal, the guitar hero, a phenomenal guitarist based in Phoenix, Arizona with the Color 8 bands. He is a guy that has lived a great story. He's a touring guitarist. He's been to Europe. He's been to South America, all across the United States. That's living a great story, which is exactly what I'm obsessed with. When I was a kid, I heard this ad by the United States Navy that said, if someone wrote a book about your life, would anyone read it? And I wanted the answer for me to be yes, because I thought that that was how you live an interesting life, to be interesting enough to put down in a book, which means you got to do interesting things, got to overcome challenges, all the things that we talk about with storytelling. And if you want to become a better storyteller, I got the cassette tape stories for you, because that is where we're headed. Storytelling is everything. And the older I get, the more I realize that we all live a story. And oftentimes, the plot of the story is hidden in the background. And it makes decisions for you in a way, and they're not always great decisions. So I want to take you back in time, because this to me obviously is very personal, that language is the most influential thing, and that story is the most important, because I live by 3 rules. And they're really simple rules. But number 1 is language is contagious. That's what I mean by saying language is the most influential thing in your life. Language works like a virus. It travels from person to person, and it can infect you in a negative way. Because negative words or descriptive words or labels will sit in your head and noodle around all day long, operating in the background while you're making decisions. And that story becomes so critical to every single step that you take. You have to be aware of what is influencing you. Language is contagious. So that's rule number 1 on how I live. Rule number 2 is that it's always personal. It's always personal for me. It's always personal for you, because you have your own unique experiences that you bring everywhere you go with you. I have mine. Even if we were at the same event at the same time, we're each going to have a different interpretation of it, a different perspective about it. So in remembering how people operate, understanding that it's always personal is such a huge key in how you can become a more effective communicator, a more effective storyteller, and how you can live a better story. Because you can't live life alone unless you want to be a hermit. So you have to interact with other people, and you might as well make these great positive experiences. So number 2, it's always personal. And the third rule that I live by is that you can only control you. This is ancient Stoicism. This is something that Marcus Aurelius and Epictetus passed down to us, that you can only control you. They called it the dichotomy of control, but the basic premise of that is you can control what you do and what you say. Basically it. I can't control what my wife's going to do later. She can't control what I'm going to do later. I can only respond and live in that. And that's really the essence of what this is today. I realized something very important during the pandemic, that with all the craziness in the world, I still have to live in it. So I should be in charge of my own story to create the story that I want. So let's go back in time. Your boy, the ROB, is in college in 1997, sophomore year. Freshman year was kind of rough in the sense that it was a big transition. Out of high school, you're going into college, you're picking your career path. I was commuting from Boston to my hometown in Hanson, which, it's about an hour. It's not that big of a deal. But sophomore year, I decided to move on campus. Sophomore year, I get my chance to do the hip-hop show, the very reason I went to Emerson College. But at the same time, I was suffering. I was sad. I was down. I was negative. Man, the negative things I said about myself back in the day, did they weigh you down? And this was a part of who I displayed, part of who I was. So at the time, 1997, I was dating a lovely young lady, and she had a close-knit family, which was really cool. And her mother was a nurse. So it mentioned, these depressive type symptoms, this sadness, sometimes outbursts of anger. And she was the first one to say to me, Rob, there are options for you. And that was the first time I had considered the word depression, was when she brought it up. Well-intended, trying to get me on the right path, but also trying to show me that there are options, right? You don't just have to suffer in silence and suffer alone. You can go talk to somebody. There are antidepressants, pills that you can take. So that conversation lingered in my head for days and days and days and weeks and weeks and weeks, because it's not an easy thing to go to therapy, to admit you want to go to therapy. You got to talk to your parents about it. That's awkward. And then you got to find a therapist, and then there's insurance problems, and does insurance cover it? Does it not? And this is in the early days of therapy being covered by health insurance. But I still wasn't sure for a long time. But it kept getting worse. Despite the fact that I had this glimmer of hope with this hip-hop show, I couldn't get out of my own head. I beat myself up tremendously. I did it really well. I mean, if we want to give ourselves grades for negative self-talk, oh man, I was an overachiever at that. But eventually I decided that I needed to suck it up. I needed to go talk to somebody. So I thanked the woman I was dating at the time, her mother, because she opened this door for me, that there's more out there. So I get my first therapy appointment in Brockton, Massachusetts, and everything seems fine. Go in there and I talk. I get to say things I don't normally get to say to people, so that's helpful. Get to explain your negative self-talk and where it comes from. And the therapist on the other end of the table, I didn't have a couch. I think it was just a chair that I sat in. I wish I had a couch. It would have been way more comfortable. But he was the one that mentioned alternative options, right? So yes, there's talk therapy, but there's also medication. But he himself, as a psychologist, can't prescribe you medication. That was a weird thing to navigate. So he referred me to a psychiatrist. And again, I had to do this in network. So in order to get my medication, I had to drive an hour and 15 minutes from my house, sit with this guy for 15 minutes while he messed around with my medication. But you see now how language is the most influential thing, right? So I have a nurse tell me that I'm probably depressed. I have a therapist who diagnoses me with this big, powerful word, depression. And this is the power of one word, depression. And then I go see a psychiatrist, and he's like, yes, you definitely are depressed. Here's some Zoloft. Do you remember Zoloft? This was 1997, by the way, was really the forefront of the Depression era in America, which we're still living in 30 years later. I'll get to some stats later. They're going to blow your mind about how ubiquitous depression is, how ubiquitous mental illness is. But back in 1997, this was all relatively new. And Zoloft was the pill that I got. And they used to run a commercial like this. Let's see here. Here we go.
You know when you feel the weight of sadness. You may feel...
Hold on, I want to pause it for a second, because what I want you to do is, if you're listening to this commercial, I want you to listen to the background noises, because they're so hilarious. Because they're like moans. But it's representative of how Big Pharma marketed depression, which tied into my story that I was telling myself.
You know when you feel the weight of sadness. You may feel exhausted, hopeless, and anxious. Whatever you do, you feel lonely and don't enjoy the things you once loved. Things just don't feel like they used to. These are some symptoms of depression, a serious medical condition affecting over 20 million Americans. While the cause is unknown, depression may be related to an imbalance of natural chemicals between nerve cells in the brain. Prescription Zoloft works to correct this imbalance.
That was the story I was told by, I still remember the doctor's name, the psychiatrist. I won't mention his name here. I don't remember my first therapist's name or my second therapist's name, but I do remember his name, because it was an awful experience. There's no other way to say that to you. It just was not great. His patient care was not great. His bedside manner, he was uncaring. He was cold. He was weird. But I had to do it because it was one of 2 or 3 options that I had. He was the closest, an hour and 15 minutes away. And I'll be honest with you. Some people tell me that they've had great results with antidepressants. I did not. They were not for me. I tried Zoloft at first, and I felt foggy. I felt gross. I just felt off. And when I brought this to my psychiatrist, he was like, okay, let's up the dose a little bit. You know the game. If you've been on medication, you know the game, right? Because they're trying to figure out where it interacts with you because we're all different. So I go see this guy, and he says, all right, we're going to up the dose of Zoloft. And then we got to a point where we upped it to a certain milligram, I can't remember. And I'm like, it's still not working. I still feel foggy. I still feel more depressed than I did without the pill. So he's like, okay, we're going to introduce a new pill to you, Wellbutrin. So what we're going to do is we're going to taper off the Zoloft, and we're going to add in Wellbutrin. So let's say I was on 125 milligrams of Zoloft. I'm making that number up. I don't know. We're going to drop it to 100. We're going to introduce 25 grams of Wellbutrin. A little cocktail of depression drugs. And as I mentioned, this was the Depression era, the very beginning of it. This is the era when drug companies started to advertise antidepressants. So let's rewind the clock just a little bit to give you the story of how depression became a mental illness that could be treated by psychologists, psychiatrists, and lots of drugs. Lots of drugs. In 1987, the drug Prozac came out. So this is 10 years before I start my mental health journey. And Prozac catches on. More and more people start to go on Prozac. And Eli Lilly, the maker of Prozac, they were like, oh, maybe we should do some advertising, and we'll start in doctors' offices. And what they did is they put flyers up, and they'd put these pictures in magazines that are in doctors' offices talking about the Prozac promise. Oh, yeah. Because what it says right here on this ad is Prozac, it delivers the therapeutic triad of convenience, confidence, and compliance. Oh, so doctors, here you go. So Eli Lilly stands to make a lot of money on Prozac because they're the first one out. They're like, oh, we got the first antidepressant. All we need to do is find people who are depressed. Who do people go see at least once a year? The doctor. So the Prozac promise, is part of a quote-unquote education campaign for doctors. So that when they talk to patients, they might say, so, are you feeling sad lately? And a lot of people are going to say, yes, I'm feeling sad. Well, there's some options for you. Prozac. Take some Prozac. So that ad comes out around 94. And around this same time, a couple of books come out about Prozac. First one came out in 93, written by a psychiatrist named Peter Kramer. Listening to Prozac, a psychiatrist explores antidepressant drugs and the remaking of self. Oh, so you see what I'm saying. How language is the most influential thing in your life. Because let's imagine you're sad. Let's imagine you talk to your doctor. Let's imagine you go to Barnes & Noble and you see this book, Listening to Prozac. And you pick it up. And in that, from a psychiatrist, an expert's point of view, someone with an advanced degree, they write a book about how you get to remake yourself with a drug, how you get to rewrite your story by taking a drug. And again, I'm not trying to downplay this because it's probably worked for people, but this stuff did not work for me. And then another book came out. And this book was even more popular. This was the book that really vaulted Prozac into the mainstream, a memoir called Prozac Nation by Elizabeth Wordle. And you can even see there, if you're looking at the video feed, Young and Depressed in America. And this came out in 94, and they later made a movie about it based on that book. That became more normal, right? So this is like 3 years before I go through this. So it's right on this cusp of this explosion of the economy of mental illness and depression. And I want to note the frequency in which I heard the word depression. I already mentioned from a nurse, from a therapist number one, from a psychiatrist. So after about a year, a little over a year, I'm really getting into the groove with therapy. I'm like, okay, this talk therapy is getting somewhere. It gives me a place to talk. It gives me a place to unload, so to speak. And it's a place that was accepting, but it didn't offer a ton of solutions. We'll get to that later. But about a year and a half in, my therapist tells me that he's moving. He's got a new job. He's moving across the state. Sorry, see you later. So I have to start over with a different therapist. Therapist number two. Therapist number two also liked to use the word depression. So I'm getting the word said to me, depression, as in that's what I am. This is a label that I should assign to myself by, what's that? 2 therapists, a psychiatrist, and a nurse. So there's 4 people. But they're not just people, they're experts. They're all in the medical field. So of course I think that they know more than me, and in probably many ways they do know more than me. But they don't know me as well as I know me. But I was easily influenced back then because the weight of the words when it comes from experts, the frequency in which you hear it, and the frequency extends into these advertisements in these books that we've been showing you and we've been talking about. So this language becomes contagious. And now this language, Rob Hunter is depressed. Rob Hunter's been diagnosed with depression. I am depressed. I am no good. I am sad. That starts to influence my story. And the story is how you live. There's no other way to say that. If you think about your life as a story, like a movie or a book, how does it measure up? And I'm not saying you have to do it like a reality show and you have to live life with all this fake trauma, but life is the same as story. There's a journey. There are obstacles that get you in the way. And then you get to decide how persistent you are to get over the obstacles to finish the chapter, to finish the story, to finish the movie. That's the essence of living to me. So I carried this story around with me for 20 years. As I mentioned, story is the most important thing in your life. It's working in the background even when you're not paying attention to it. Because here's the reality of what happened based on this. This story that I was depressed, it made me think that I can't help it. Nothing I can do about it. I tried the pills, they didn't work. I tried talk therapy for like 2 years, that didn't work. So I'm just assuming I have to live with this. In fact, some of the experts told me that. Oh, yeah, Rob, this is something you're going to just have to live with forever. Sorry about that. But you can manage it. You can do it with these pills. Okay. So I can't help it. Depression became a label that I could use. And because it became a label, it became a way of life, but it also became an excuse. The excuse to make poor decisions. Excuses when I continued to make the same poor decisions again and again and again. And you can't get out of this cycle because this story, you're reinforcing it all the time with the frequency of the language and the frequency that your mind revisits the language from the experts, the nurse. And again, they're well-intended. I'm not knocking therapy, but I am knocking it to some degree because not all of it's good. Not all of it's helpful. Not all of it actually helps you with the tools and how your mind works and how to take control of your mind. But that's a story for another day. Going back to the story being the most important thing, I'm living depressed, telling myself I can't help it, labeling myself, excusing my poor behavior because I just can't help it. And this was the story that I was living. So even though over the 20 years I had a very successful career in radio broadcasting, I was a talk show host in 6 different states in this country. I filled in on various radio stations. I quit my job at the end of 2023 in Phoenix, Arizona as the #1 rated afternoon show in the town. So I had a very successful career, but this story of depression was still running around in that background, and that was the story that I was living. I wasn't even appreciating the career accolades. I wasn't appreciating some of the awards that I got, the rating increases that I brought to the table. I was living in this place that no matter what I did wasn't good enough. So that was my story. Until one day, 20 years later, 2017, and maybe it's 2018, Amy, my wife, comes to me, Mrs. H, and she says, I have tickets to this event in Los Angeles. Would you go with me? I said, of course I'll go with you. I don't know what the event is. I don't even ask. I'm just like, yeah, I'm in for it. I'm in for the ride. So we go to Los Angeles, and it's a personal development conference put on by a woman named Mary Morrissey, who is phenomenal. Just a super, super cool lady. She gets on stage, I think it's the second day. It might be after lunch. And she says, "Your thoughts are not your own." And I'm sitting towards the back of the room, and I'm like, what? What does that mean? How would my thoughts not be my own? And she went on to explain what I just explained to you. That sometimes you pick up a word from an expert, a medical professional. You pick up a word from your mom or your dad or your uncle or your aunt. You pick up words from your friends. And those thoughts, those words, are not yours. They're just something you carry with you. Again, language is contagious. That's what this is. And I was very taken by this idea that my thoughts are not my own. And what stuck with me from that is that when a negative thought would come in, one of those depressive thoughts would come in, I would just tell myself, your thoughts are not your own. And what that would do is it'd give me a second, because that's really the start of a mental health journey, wherever you're at now, versus the reaction you want to have to a stimulus. Maybe it's traffic, maybe it's a spouse, maybe it's a friend, maybe it's, who knows, a neighbor that has barking dogs. I do have those, by the way. Very loud, very annoying, 10:30 at night, barking dogs. But nonetheless, that second that you can give yourself allows that thought to just kind of pass through. And at first, it takes a long time. It takes more than a second. It's like a battle. It's like an arm wrestling match where you're like, negative thought. And you're like, my thoughts are not my own. Negative thought. My thoughts are not my own. So it's this back and forth. But eventually you win. You win that arm wrestling match. That is when you can start to rewrite your story. And that's exactly what happened to me. And I started by rewriting my story. After I heard this, your thoughts are not your own, this became really a daily practice for me. And it still is in many ways. That no matter what I think, even if it's like I want to pat myself on the back, or I'm like, oh my God, Rob, that was such a great podcast. I'm like, come on, bruh. Your thoughts are not your own. You know, sometimes you got to stay humble, right? So your thoughts are not your own allowed me some space to let things float through and not get stuck, because those negative thoughts would be like a loop. I don't know if you can experience the same thing, that if you do something wrong and you spiral, and it might be like 3 days later, you're still feeling bad about it. And that is what I realized, that it's time to rewrite my story. So one of the first things that I did when I started to rewrite my story is I went back and I looked at my life, including 1997, including being influenced by the word depression. And that when rewriting my story, I understood that language is contagious. So I started to write a different story of my past. I looked at all the career successes that I had. I looked at the willingness to go anywhere to pursue my dream. I went from Boston to Florida, back to Boston to New Orleans, got flooded out during Hurricane Katrina. I was there, went to Atlanta for a little while, ended up going to New Mexico, was there for about a year before I moved to Phoenix, which is where I still live almost 20 years later. Like it's just phenomenal to look back now and rewrite the narrative of my own story and be appreciative and be happy. And even if I look at that period of being 19 years old and it being the lowest point in my life, I still can go back and appreciate that, because it's part of the story. It's part of what I overcame. It's part of my willingness to keep going that makes me who I am. And that's the story I continue to live to this day, because after I rewrote my past story, I really stepped as into the main character role as I could in my own life. So I ask that question to people all the time. Do you feel like you're the main character in your own story? Main characters are the reasons stories exist, the reasons we watch movies, the reasons we read novels. Because the world happens and they have to live in that world and they have to figure their way through that world and they have to take the right action steps. So I think about life as a story in that regard. And I was able to do that because I could go back and I could use the storytelling elements, things like theme and characters who help you and characters who get in your way, obstacles, raising the stakes. And you can look at all of the things that happen in your life and you can say, man, not bad. Not bad, Rob Hunter. Not bad. Because you see things in a different perspective when you rewrite your own story. It's like you zoom out, which is exactly what I did. I zoomed out and I looked back over my life and I was like, oh, okay, it's a pretty good life, Robbie. Pretty good life you've lived so far. Let's keep it up. And I say that to you now because I no longer call myself depressed. Even though I thought that was a label I had to live with forever, even though experts told me that that is something I'm going to have to live with forever, it is not. Because there are multiple ways to solve problems. There are multiple ways to manage mental illness. The one that worked for me was rewriting my story because it turns out the story was more powerful than the drugs. The story I was telling myself was more powerful than the talk therapy. Rewrite the story, take control of my story, my life, no longer needing to use depression as an excuse for poor behavior. Now I look back at that poor behavior and I say, okay, I had some challenges. I had challenges for sure, like we all do. But it's what I do now that matters. It's not what I did in the past. It's what I learned from the past by rewriting my story that I can apply now to create an even better story, to live a better life. And I bring all of this up because the statistics, and I got my whiteboard behind me. I do all my work on whiteboards. My coaching clients, we bust out the whiteboards because it helps you see things and connect dots. And on the bottom here, where I'm pointing right now, I have the 2026 stats. And this is just really going to focus in on how big of an economy this is. And I bring that up to go very back to the beginning because in 1997, when the Depression era was beginning, we now live in a place where everyone has a mental illness. And everyone likes to run with their own labels. It's like how many labels you have means something in modern currency, in social media circles or whatever. But let's look at the industry behind this. Because the industry is influencing people's stories. Because there's money at play. I have a friend who's a congressman. He's running for governor in the state of Arizona. And he said, Rob, you might think it's about ideals. It's not. You might think it's about the vanity of the politicians. Say, yeah, kinda. But what it's really about, always, is money. Money. Everything's about money. So in 2026, this year, about $20 billion worldwide will be spent on antidepressants. Talk therapy in the United States alone, $100 billion industry. And I'm not saying it's bad. It's useful. It certainly is. If you find the right person to talk to that can help you rewrite your story. Because I never got that experience with therapists, and I went to 5. I had to go to two different times in my life. 19 to about 21, and then 30 to about 32. And I got diagnosed with depression again at the age of 30. So if you want more proof how story is the most important thing in your life, that's it. And how you can hang on to things. So from 19 to 30, I made like no improvement doing what I was supposed to do. So it was time to rewrite the story. Because that $100 billion on therapy is a lot. It's a lot. And if the experience was like mine, it leaves you something lacking, right? You're like, it's not so good. And get this. 45 million Americans are on antidepressants. 45 million. That's a lot. This gets crazier. 1 in 4 college kids, and they did an age range bracket of people slightly over college, 18 to 24. 1 in 4 are on antidepressants. So it's become commonplace, a common story. And I see this all the time. I talk to people and they tell me that they have ADHD. And they have other things that have become part of their story. That to me, when I was like this, that became my excuse to not live the high standard that I want to live, to not be as good of a person as I was. And that's really what's behind this, is I look back at my story And I have a couple of themes that stand out. Number one, I fully believe in living life off the wall. That's a Michael Jackson song. And I interpret that in a way that life's going to give you a groove. It's your choice whether to dance with it or whether to stand on the wall. When you live life off the wall, you're on the dance floor. You're dancing with life. You're dancing with the groove, whatever that groove may be. So that's one theme. And the other theme is really that story is your most important. And I realize that now. And I started to realize that 39, 40 years old. But that ability to rewrite my own story has meant the world. Because now I'm in control. Now I no longer make excuses. Now I own up to my own responsibilities because I have set a standard for my life. A standard that it is a great story. And it continues to be. For example, last year I went to Africa and it blew my mind. To me, that's living a great story. That doesn't mean that going to Africa is your thing necessarily. But being adventurous, trying new things, that's how you continue to write new chapters in your story. Because if we go back to the very beginning and we think about how language influences us, something's influencing you right now. Someone is influencing you right now. And it's great to take counsel. It's great to take advice. It's great to listen to everything. But if you create your own filter system, you can manage through all that language that's trying to influence you. People that are trying to get you to say yes. But are you really a yes? That's up to you. And you only know that when you're in your own story and you're living in your own story. So this adventure, this journey, this story continues. But helping me understand how to live that better story was learning how much language is contagious. And I'll go back to those other two rules. Because once I learned that language is contagious, yeah, I'm still susceptible. I'm still gullible. We all are. We're still liable to be influenced by outside sources. But we are entering a time where information is going to become flying at us. If you paid any attention to news about the war in Iran, it was very hard to tell the truth. Very hard to determine who is spinning and who wasn't and who still is and who isn't. It's very hard to determine what actually is happening in Iran right now in relation to the United States. So I bring that up because your ability to sift through this and write your own story has never been more important. And that's what we do here. That's what we're obsessed with, helping you live your great story. And it's something else I learned. Telling better stories helps you live a better story. Storytelling is the most valuable communication skill that you have. So I invite you to go to cassettetapestories.com if you want to shore up your storytelling abilities. And what do I mean by telling better stories helps you live a better story? Telling better stories, I'm going to give you two contexts. I'm going to give you an executive that I work with. She started telling stories in big meetings, stories about her own life, but stories about successes that she's seen in her years of corporate in HR. And she's telling these stories of successes and learning development and how someone who started as an entry-level employee took the internal training and became the IT manager within like 5 years. He improved his life. The company saved a bunch of money because they were able to hire internally and move him through. It worked out great. So she gets to tell that story. And it's working because she already got promoted. And she's being eyed for another one. Business owners that I work with. I work with several who are doing okay, doing good, but they know they can do better. And we look at everything. And what we found was that when the business owners still tell stories, same thing that we talked about with the executive, tell a story about the transformation a client went through, people get it. Story about why you do what you do, people get it. And when people get it, they want to work with you. So that's how stories create living a better story, because they open the right doors, and that business growth can go anywhere. For example, one of the business owners that I work with got to speak at Sundance. How cool is that? So she starts telling better stories and living better stories. So that is your task. I'd ask you, how is your story? Are you stuck in a chapter that you need to end to start a new one? That's what we do. My name is Rob Hunter. You can find me at robhunter.me. Rob@robhunter.me if you want to drop me an email. We'll be back with you real soon. Cheers.